I'd like to present our next speaker, Robert Stacey, who will be talking about a partnership working in the UK to prevent, prepare for, and respond to wildfires, a case study of the Northumberland Collaborative Burning Project.
Okay, welcome to the English contingent. My name is Andrew Miller. I'm from Northumberland National Park, and my colleague here, Dr. Robert Stacey from Northumberland Fire and Rescue Service. And we're going to do a little double act just to finish off this session, really in the spirit of the presentation we're going to give to you, which is all about working together to tackle the issues of wildfire and prescribed burning. We come from a place in the north of England, Northumberland. It's a relatively large county, right on the edge of the Scottish border, and it's a very sparsely populated county. We've only got just over 300,000 people living in the whole of the area, an area of 5,000 square kilometres. And the majority of those people live in a very small part down in the southeast of the county, so very sparsely populated. The national park covers about 1,000 square kilometres of Northumberland, and we've got fewer than 2,000 people actually living in the park. So it's a very remote area for England with very few people. You can see the national park there up on the right, and we're one of 15 national parks now in the UK, 10 in England, 3 in Wales and 2 in Scotland. And we're one of the smallest national parks, but we've been designated since 1956. And a large part of our national park is covered in heathland. This is now recognised as very important in a European and indeed in a global context. And we have really very extensive areas of upland heath in Northumberland and throughout the north of the UK. This is a mixture of dry heath, wet heath, and also blanket bog, which is saturated peat areas where we have similar sorts of species of plants growing, but a very different type of habitat, which is a saturated peatland area. Typically, all of these have developed over many thousands of years and have developed really from burning. So we can trace back the landscape that you see in the picture there to about 7,000 years ago. Just prior to that, this was all forest. This was a pine forest, and it was the action of people burning, cutting, and then grazing the land that helped develop this habitat that you see today. And it is that continued pressure from humans actually going out and managing the land that has both created and then retained that landscape. We now see it as very important, as I said, in the European context, and we have, you can see the map on the right-hand side of the national park shows you how this habitat is spread across the whole of the park, but is in little patches. So it's part of a mosaic of many other habitats and other types of land use. So you've got everything from the heathland and the blanket bog areas to more extensive pasture land, grassland, some small woodland areas, and also some modern conifer plantations. So it's a real mixture of habitats, and it's that mixture that has made it more difficult these days for land managers to burn in a safe way. We've added to the complexity by designating some parts of the land for nature conservation, and we've therefore prevented some of our land managers from actually carrying out prescribed burning. We've equally broken up the landscape with other types of modern forestry, as I've said, and that adds a different dimension and a different risk to burning. And so we've created a situation where the traditional methods of burning have become much more dangerous, and the risks have risen significantly. However, those places are really, really important, and they're important for not only the vegetation, the plants, but also for many other species of birds and animals and invertebrates. And this is just one of them. This is the curlew, which is the emblem of Northumberland National Park, and is now identified as a very endangered species in European context, and just last year was put on the red list. And this is one of the species that requires this open landscape with a mixture of different habitats that requires some burning. I'm going to hand over to Rob.
First change, just to keep you on your toes. Partly through our geography and then partly through the actions that we've taken in the county, we have a wildfire risk. Now, it's a bit different to the wildfire risk in other areas that are covered within this conference, partly because it's very much driven by the weather. So whereas you're pretty much guaranteed to get some large wildfires in most of the Mediterranean countries every year, we don't always get large fires in Northumberland every year. What happens is that we get some years where it's actually very quiet, it's very damp, it's very British, the weather. But other years, we get significantly dry conditions, which then lead to what we call spate conditions. Lots of wildfires in lots of different areas of the country, in the county. And that often actually replicates to other areas of the UK as well. That then puts a pressure on my colleagues and I in the Fire and Rescue Service, where we're stretched to the limit. But this sporadic nature is very challenging. Now, what we realized about 10 years ago, a little bit longer than that, a number of my colleagues in Northumberland, but also around the country, was that we could actually learn from colleagues in other countries. And that's where we actually started to reach out, particularly to Catalonia, to the Graph to start with, but then more widely to other countries, to look at the partnership working, the partnership approach, trying to see wildfire, prescribed burning as interrelated issues, as things with lots of stakeholders that needed to get around the table and talk together. Fire and Rescue Service had a habit of just seeing it as it was our legal duty to put it out, but it was a very simplistic approach. So we actually started to go through the process of forming lots of different local and regional multi-agency groups, lots of different agencies with a vested interest in wildfire. I've got the logo of the Northumberland Fire Group up there. It was one of the first, but there are now a whole series of these around the UK in different areas. And then also, stemming from that, is there are now some national forums which are looking at partnership working as well. The Scottish Wildfire Forum was set up first, obviously representing Scottish interests, and then we had the England and Wales Wildfire Forum briefly kind of after that came along. And my colleagues and I are involved in some of the work done at that national and local level.
As Rob said, we've had a history of wildfires, and most, particularly in the last 10 years or so, we've realized the damage that these have been causing. This is an example of a wildfire that happened about 4 or 5 years ago. You can see the scar of the fire across the hill there. And its importance is that this is a Natura 2000 special area of conservation. It's for its heathland communities, and you can see that the fire has burned right across the hill, and particularly around the rocky, craggy areas, which were very important for a number of different species of birds, for instance. And the environment, the habitat that had developed there over the last 50 years or so had become extremely important for a number of birds that nested there. The fire actually started as a very small prescribed burn in the bottom corner there, and should only have covered approximately half a hectare in size. And in the end, it's covered probably about 50 hectares. It actually burned over the hill and then ran downhill and across the face of the hillside. The damage that that's done will take probably another 50 years to recover. Because the heather-dominated, Kaluna-dominated habitat has now been replaced entirely by a vaccinium-dominated habitat, and that is not the habitat that many of the birds and other invertebrate species that were special to that area require. So this is the kind of place that we're now trying to work with the Fire and Rescue Service so that we can burn these kinds of areas much more safely.
So how we're doing that at the minute is through the collaborative burning project. This is prescribed burning, but we've kind of added the collaborative in there to emphasize the importance of all the different parties that are getting together at all the different stages of burning, from getting people around the table to discuss different objectives that the different agencies have, to trying to come to some compromises on what we can do most effectively, to then identifying specific sites, high-risk sites, to then doing the burning collaboratively together, Fire and Rescue Service sitting alongside other agencies at the burn, to then going back and investigating the burns afterwards. We're trying to do everything together as a cohesive group. And that's in a 3-year project which just came to an end. We're now looking at phase 2 because it was quite successful, phase 1. And it's really got 4 key aims, this project. We're trying to achieve quite a lot, but I think we did quite a good job. Firstly, facilitating joint working between all the multiple stakeholders, bringing everyone together to talk about issues. It's also about providing fire suppression and prescribed burning education. As I said, the sporadic nature of our wildfires within the county mean our fire crews aren't always exposed to it on a regular basis. So we're trying to maintain their competencies and skills in this kind of environment, and prescribed burning gives us a good way of doing that. But also, likewise, to increase the education of other people that work in the countryside, foresters, people in the national park. We're also purchasing additional equipment, which we're placing in the park, so it's very quick to get to. And we're also raising awareness more widely about wildfire and prescribed burning. We've also got on the telly as well, on the BBC. So it's been quite a high-profile project. That's our specialist team that's kind of involved, and a big thanks to all of them, many of whom are here today, working very hard on this along with other wildfire projects. And the kinds of places we're working is really challenging, and that's why no burning is going on, and why it's actually quite good that we've got so many people involved. We've got challenging sites like this, difficult access. There are rules on there. We can't take 4x4 vehicles, we can't take tractors. We have to walk crews 1.5 kilometers to get there, so it's quite challenging. We're focusing on high-risk sites that have experienced wildfires in the past. We're trying to make them a bit more defensible in the future. And we're working primarily with landowners with very few resources. We're working with this landowner here. He works on his own. He's got a massive area of land for sheep, and he has no resources to burn, but he needs to burn to keep it there. I'll just really rattle through. We're also primarily creating some buffer zones as well to try and defend some of the other sites. This is an area of grassland bordering onto a massive forest, Kielder Forest, which you may have heard of, trying to make things a bit more protected in the future. Doing some equipment trials too. So just to round off, we found that it was a really positive experience, a lot of partnership working, and we made some really big inroads. It was small scale, but we're now going to look to doing a second phase of that project to expand training to more stations and to bring in more stakeholders like the Ministry of Defence.
Thank you so very much. That was a truly fascinating presentation to round out our session this afternoon. I apologize for being a time cop today, but there are other sessions starting in the other room. But perhaps if any of the presenters from this session who were unable to take questions due to time constraints happen to still be in the room, and if there are any people in the audience who have questions, perhaps those conversations can begin during the next 15 minutes before lunch. Thank you again.
Si los ponentes subís, if the speakers come up, maybe we can take some questions. So, do you have any questions for any of the speakers who...
Thanks. Davide Ascoli, University of Naples. I have a question for Professor Tulop from South Africa about the open-ended fuel brakes. And my question is, how much this system relies on the grass fuel, and could it work when you have a very heterogeneous fuel in the landscapes with different time lags and different moisture of extinction? So how it works when you have fuels that get moisture of extinction in different times, and so maybe can create operative problems the day after or even later?
Well, to try and attempt to answer your question, fuel load is a critical one. Fuel load is a very critical one, so you must have enough fuel to be able to carry the fire. But these extinctions at different fuel moistures, I think, could provide a challenge to the managers. But there is a minimum fuel moisture that you require to be able to have the fire to spread, but then it mustn't go too low to be able to not be extinguished by a drop in temperature or an increase in humidity. So that answers your question, sir.
Luis Galeana, de Universidad Autónoma de Madrid. Una pregunta para Edgar Nebot. Has descrito este proceso vuestro de aprendizaje, de progreso en el conocimiento, y yo quería simplemente plantearte de qué manera se conjuga el saber tradicional, el know-how, con el saber científico, el know-why, saber cómo hacer las cosas, pero también saber por qué se hacen las cosas. ¿De qué manera estas dos facetas se conjugan en vuestro aprendizaje?
Yo creo que entre ayer con Cullello y con Emili hacen el nexo de unión la gente que trabaja el territorio desde el territorio. También vimos los agentes rurales, el acompañamiento que hacían de los propietarios. Al final es una cuestión de abrir la mente, confiar y explicar lo que necesitas de una forma llana. El mundo operativo debemos entender que a veces las cosas las podemos hacer mejor, porque el mundo científico nos está diciendo lo que estáis haciendo puede mejorar aquí, aquí y allí. Y entiendo, o me gustaría entender, que el mundo científico puede direccionar sus estudios allí donde el mundo operativo lo necesitamos y así tener un feedback muy directo. De todas formas, es una pregunta complicada a nivel de, al final todo al final son relaciones entre intereses, valores y personas al final. Añade algo, Cristina. Que yo... No.
¿Hay alguna pregunta más? Pues...
Sí, hola. Albert Alemany, de la Fundación Pau Costa. A Andrew y Robert, en castellano, ¿no? La pregunta es si las quemas de precipitación son una herramienta habitual o no en la gestión de fauna en vuestra red de parques naturales.
Okay, I think I understood your question to be about the relationship between management for wildlife and management for other land management, agriculture. Is that the question?
Repito la pregunta, es si las... Sí. Sorry, my English is not fine for asking. Okay.
Change the channel or is
¿Ya?
Yeah.
Ok. ¿Son las quemas prescritas una herramienta habitual en la gestión de fauna en la red de parques naturales o nacionales de Inglaterra?
Yes, the answer is yes. It is typical to use prescribed burning for management for wildlife, but it is increasingly controversial. More and more people are questioning whether it is a good thing to use burning, and maybe we should do more with mowing or cutting rather than burning. It's particularly true on the areas of blanket bog that I talked about, where there is concern about the damage to the peat and the release of carbon, and also the impact on watercourses, on water quality and flooding and so on. So there is a big debate in the UK now about whether or not it's good generally. But I think at the moment most people accept that on the dry heath it is a positive thing to maintain that particular habitat.
Is there any other question? Okay, thanks to everybody, and we will go to lunch now.
Do you have a means of being able to describe the condition of the vegetation that you're trying to achieve?